Should you run a half marathon in your training for a half marathon? That's the question that we're going to answer in today's video. And it was inspired by a friend of mine who was talking to me about a half marathon that he was training for. And he was wondering if a 13.1 mile run should be included or part of his buildup and in his training for the race. So we're going to answer that question today. And the way that I kind of explained to him was it kind of boils down into two different scenarios when you're thinking about training for a half marathon. So the first is going to be if you're training for completion, maybe you should. If it's your first time running and racing and training for a half marathon, it depends on how fit you are and how comfortable you are actually running that 13.1 miles as you're building up in your training. I know a lot of people that are very comfortable in the 10K distance and those like 6 to 8 mile runs, but once they start to reach up to the 13.1 distance, they start to have some troubles. So getting ready for the race, you might not have enough time and enough mileage and enough skill in running to actually be able to complete the 13.1 miles before the actual race. Sometimes people will be reaching on race day to complete that distance, okay? Now, those are for the people that maybe didn't give themselves enough time. Maybe they're coming out of an injury and they've had to ramp up really slowly, but they have this race on the calendar that they are capable of doing, but maybe the way that the timing works out, doing a 13.1 mile run before the actual race isn't actually that good of an idea. But there are a lot of people who are training for a half marathon for the first time. The goal of the race is to complete the race. It's not necessarily to set a specific time goal. And they have enough time and they have the fitness where they can build up to that 13.1 mile long run or even longer before the actual event so that they can acclimate their body to that distance. So if you're training for completion and you're signed up for a half marathon, it does kind of depend on how much time until the race, what your running volume is, and what your comfort is. But I will say it's generally a good idea because the half marathon isn't so large of a race like a marathon, where if you were to try to complete the race distance of a marathon in your training, you would really have a lot of trouble with that. Most people for the marathon can build up to 20, maybe even 22 miles. Most people in their training for a marathon are not running a marathon in their training, but it is different for the half marathon. The distance, 13.1 miles, is not long enough to really mess up your weekend or mess up your day or the next few days afterwards, even if it's your first time running this distance. The marathon is a little bit of a different beast because it's simply so far and it kind of gets past that 18-mile mark, which is the wall. So for the half marathon, if you're training for completion, I would encourage you to, but you don't necessarily have to. You can reach on race day for that 13.1 mile distance, even if you hadn't done it in your training leading up to it, okay? And then the second instance, the second time that you would really be thinking about doing a half marathon in your training for a half marathon is if you're training for performance. If you are trying to set a PR in the half marathon, you should absolutely have half marathons built into your training program or even longer. You can go 14, 15 mile long runs in your training for the half marathon, and it really just builds your body and it builds your legs to being able to tolerate that distance, so that when you are actually racing, it's not new, your body's used to that distance, and maybe it's even gone a little bit longer, a little bit further, but you are obviously going to be trying to push the pace when you're racing. But if you're training for performance, you should absolutely be trying to run half marathons in your training, and that's even with an S, half marathons plural. You should feel very comfortable with that half marathon distance so that you can put out the best performance on race day. So it kind of depends on where you're at in your running and what your goals are, but more often than not, it is a good idea to do the half marathon in your training. You don't necessarily have to, but especially if you're trying to set a PR or you're trying to put out a good performance, or if you have some sort of a time goal with the half marathon, then doing it in your training is going to be a really, really good idea. If you know somebody who is training for a half marathon, send this video to them. And if you like this video, give me a like. If you have any questions, drop it in the comments. Thank you so much for watching.